Today we will bring you a romantic love story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. The Grand Meridian Hotel glowed with crystal chandeliers, its grand lobby sparkling like a starry sky in the heart of New York. Laughter echoed, wine glasses clinked, blending with the gentle jazz from the band in the corner. Harper Lane stood amid the crowd, her vibrant red evening gown hugging her curves, drawing every eye. Her wavy brown hair cascaded over her shoulders, her green eyes shimmering with confidence. But to the keen observer, a flicker of worry passed through them. At 27, Harper was an independent creative director who had just won an award for a groundbreaking fashion brand campaign. Tonight, she was the star of the Design and Media Gala, but her radiant smile was merely a facade. In her small clutch, Harper's phone buzzed incessantly, messages from the hospital about unpaid bills for her mother, who was battling chronic hepatitis. Each notification hit like a hammer, but Harper ignored them, taking another sip of martini. Just tonight, she told herself, I'm allowed to forget. Colleagues surrounded her, praising her victory. Harper, you've made us proud, one said, patting her shoulder, pulling her in to talk of the award. She laughed loudly, her voice sharp and charming, but her mind drifted. 6 months ago, she had flatly rejected a contract with Thorne Global, the media giant, solely because of its CEO, Julian Thorne, a cold man with a ruthless reputation in business. I don't work with people who only care about money, she had declared, her eyes defiant in front of his assistant. Now, with hospital bills piling up, she wondered if she'd been too stubborn. Clients paid late, her private studio drained her savings, and pride wouldn't let her ask for help. Late into the night, after a few cocktails, Harper's head spun. The crowd thinned, the lights dimmed, and the jazz slowed, lulling her into a dreamlike haze. She stumbled to the front desk, her red dress gliding across the marble floor, her voice slightly slurred. My room, Harper Lane. The desk clerk, likely exhausted from a long shift, handed her a keycard without double-checking. Harper took it, not noticing the 1903 printed instead of 1902. All she wanted was a bed, sleep, and to forget. Forget the hospital, the debts, and the name Julian Thorne that once infuriated her. The door to room 1903 clicked open as Harper swiped the card. Dim light from the hallway spilled onto thick velvet carpet and lavish furnishings. The scent of sandalwood lingered, inviting her into a small paradise. Harper kicked off her red heels, the sound echoing in the quiet. She unzipped her dress, letting it slide off her shoulders, revealing pale skin in the soft glow. Without bothering to turn on the light, she collapsed onto the king-size bed, silk sheets enveloping her. Her hair splayed messily on the white pillow, her breathing steady in the darkness. She drifted off, unaware that this room wasn't hers, but belonged to the man she'd sworn to never cross paths with. At the same moment in the hotel lobby, a black Bentley pulled up. Julian Thorne stepped out, suit jacket draped over his arm, his gray eyes scanning the space with cold precision. At 32, he was a symbol of power, CEO of Thorne Global, running a media empire with an iron grip. Fresh from a business trip in London, he was exhausted but still exuded in commanding presence. He wanted nothing more than quiet sleep in his familiar suite. Room 1903. The desk clerk bowed, handing him the keycard. Julian nodded curtly, stepping into the elevator, oblivious to the surprise awaiting him. He swiped the card, pushed open the door to 1903. Hallway light spilled in, and he froze. A figure lay on the bed, a vivid red dress stark against white sheets. Julian frowned, assuming it was another cheap stunt by a business rival. Again, he muttered, his hand reaching for the phone to call the desk. But as moonlight from the window illuminated the woman's face, he stopped. Harper Lane, the woman who had stared him down 6 months ago, rejecting Thorne Global's contract with haughty disdain. Her hair was tousled, lips slightly parted, dress slipped off one shoulder, revealing the delicate curve of her neck. She slept deeply, utterly vulnerable, a stark contrast to her fierce demeanor back then. Julian stood still, his heart, always tightly controlled, stirring faintly. Harper, here in his room, was an unexpected puzzle. He closed the door softly, walked to the sofa, and sat, his eyes never leaving her. In the dim light, she looked both strong and fragile, like a painting he couldn't stop studying. "Miss Lane," he whispered, his deep voice laced with amusement, "you sure know how to surprise me." He didn't call the desk or wake her. Instead, he draped his jacket over the chair, loosened his tie, and sat there, a coffee from the minibar in hand, waiting. He didn't know why, but the thought of her leaving right now irked him. Morning sunlight pierced the silk curtains, stinging Harper's eyes. She grimaced, her head pounding. The faint smell of coffee stirred her, but as she blinked awake, her body froze. This wasn't her room. The bed was too large, the curtains too luxurious, and a man sat on the sofa across from her, white shirt unbuttoned at the top, holding a coffee mug, watching her with a smirking smile. Julian Thorne. Harper shot upright, heart racing. She yanked her dress back over her shoulder, checking her clothes, thankfully intact. What's going on?" she stammered, her voice cracking with panic. Her mind rewound the night. The gala, cocktails, the front desk, the key card. "Oh no," she muttered, realizing she'd entered the wrong room. "Enjoy your night, Miss Lane," Julian said, his voice low and steady, his eyes glinting with mischief. He sipped his coffee leisurely, as if savoring the moment. Harper flushed, humiliated and furious. You knew I was in the wrong room. Why didn't you wake me?" She stood, stumbling as she searched for her shoes, trying to muster confidence despite her racing pulse. "This is the hotel's mistake, not me breaking in." Julian set his coffee down and rose, tall and imposing. He stepped closer, making Harper instinctively back up until her back hit the wall. "I've been wondering how to get you to sign with Thorne Global," he said slowly, "and it turns out all it takes is you walking into the wrong room." "How dare you?" Harper snapped, her eyes blazing. "Don't think I'll let you use this against me. I'll never work with you, Thorne." She spun, rushing to the door, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the lock. Julian's presence seemed to linger behind her, though he didn't follow. "Good morning, Miss Lane," he called, his voice tinged with amusement. "Watch your key card next time." Harper slammed the door, racing down the hallway, her face burning. She swore Julian Thorne would never get the chance to mock her again. But as she stepped into the elevator, she didn't know his eyes followed her through the door's crack, glinting with intrigue and a strange emotion, one even Julian didn't yet understand. Harper sat in her small apartment, the desk lamp casting light on a stack of hospital bills piled on the old wooden table. Her laptop screen displayed an email from Julian Thorne's assistant, inviting her to Thorne Global's office to discuss a new brand design project. She frowned, her finger hovering over the delete button. The memory of that morning in room 1903 flashed back. Julian's mischievous eyes, his smirking smile, and the line that made her flush. "All it takes is you walking into the wrong room." She'd sworn he'd never mock her again, but the thought of the room mix-up spreading worried her. In the design industry, reputation was everything, and Harper couldn't let a drunken mistake ruin what she'd built. She sighed, typing a few words. "I'll be there." 10 a.m. She hit send, telling herself it was just business, nothing more. The next morning, Harper stepped into Thorne Global's glass tower in central Manhattan, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She wore a fitted navy dress, hair tied high, projecting professionalism to mask the storm of emotions inside. The elevator took her to the 45th floor, where Julian's office commanded a view of New York's skyline. His assistant, a young woman with a polite smile, led her to a conference room. Harper sat, flipping through project documents, but her heart raced when she heard familiar footsteps. Julian appeared, his black suit tailored perfectly, his gray eyes scanning her coolly. "Miss Lane," he said, his voice low and even. "I thought you wouldn't show." Harper looked up, her gaze sharp. "I'm here for work, Mr. Thorne, not for fun." Julian smirked, sitting across from her at the long glass table. "Of course," he replied, but his eyes lingered, as if trying to pierce her confident facade. He slid a document toward her. "This project needs a mind like yours. New global brand, unlimited budget." Harper skimmed the pages, trying to focus, but his voice grated on her, too confident, too controlled. And I assume you picked me for my talent, not because of last week's incident? She asked, her tone laced with sarcasm. Julian tilted his head, his eyes glinting. You do seem to sleep anywhere, don't you? But rest assured, I chose you for the designs you sent 6 months ago, though you rejected me rather harshly. Harper flushed, recalling that tense meeting. She'd called him a profit-obsessed suit, dismissing his contract in front of his team. Now she needed money, not just for her mother, but to keep her studio afloat. Recent clients paid late, and she'd nearly depleted her savings renting a new workspace. She took a deep breath. If this is serious business, I'll consider it. But don't expect me to go easy, Thorne. Julian chuckled softly, the sound sending a shiver through her. I like a challenge, Miss Lane, he said, then signaled his assistant to start the presentation. The meeting lasted 2 hours, and Harper was surprised by Julian's approach. He was sharp, asking pointed questions, but paused when an intern stumbled, gently guiding them. He wasn't the arrogant man she'd assumed, at least not with his team. As documents passed across the table, his fingers brushed hers. Harper flinched, pulling back, a jolt like electricity running through her. Julian glanced at her, a flicker of amusement in his eyes, but he said nothing. She told herself to stay focused, but those eyes clung to her, as if he knew she was hiding something. They began working together the following week. Harper agreed to the project, not just for the 6-figure contract, enough to cover her mother's hospital bills for months, but to prove she wasn't afraid of Julian Thorne. Thorne Global's office became their battlefield. Late-night meetings stretched on, with fierce debates over colors, fonts, and concepts. You're too stubborn, Julian said once, pointing at a design on the screen. And you're too controlling, Harper shot back, standing from her chair, hands on hips. Colleagues watched silently, not daring to intervene. Yet after every clash, Julian kept one of her ideas, tweaking it just enough to make it shine. Harper realized he didn't just listen. He valued her talent, despite his cold demeanor. One late evening, the office was empty except for them. Golden light spilled over the desk, the city glittering beyond the window. Harper rubbed her temples, eyes burning from staring at the screen. Julian walked in, holding 2 coffees, placing one in front of her. You work harder than I expected, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. But don't let me find you passed out like that night again. Harper's head snapped up, heart pounding. He was referencing the room mix-up, but his tone wasn't mocking. Was it concern? She grabbed the coffee, muttering, Worry about your staff, Thorne. He smiled, sitting beside her, closer than usual. You're not staff, Harper, he said, using her first name for the first time. The air stilled, and Harper stood quickly, mumbling about checking emails. She didn't want him to see her cheeks burning. The next week, during a meeting, Julian publicly praised Harper's idea to the board. Miss Lane has elevated this project, he said, his gaze lingering on her a second too long. Harper was stunned, unaccustomed to his openness. After the meeting, he invited her to dinner, to discuss work. She refused instantly. I don't mix business and personal, Mr. Thorne. Julian smiled, his eyes fixed on her. Then why were you in my bed? The words froze her, blood rushing to her face. She turned, hurrying to the elevator, but his voice echoed in her mind. As the doors closed, she leaned against the wall, heart racing. She hated him, or was she convincing herself she did? At home, Harper sat at her desk, staring at hospital bills stacked like a challenge. She opened her laptop, finding a new email from Julian. Not about work, but a short note. You left your jacket in the office. I'm keeping it for you. She frowned, recalling how he'd handed her coffee, how he'd said her name. She deleted the email, vowing to keep boundaries. But as she turned off the light to sleep, Julian's image lingered. His smirking smile, his deep eyes, the brush of his hand. She shook her head, pulling the blanket over, but her heart wouldn't listen. In Thorne Global's office, Julian sat alone in the darkened conference room, studying a design Harper left behind. Its bold lines and vibrant colors bore her unmistakable mark. He traced her signature, H. Lane, murmuring, You won't get away, Harper. Not for the contract, not for power games, for something deeper, something he wasn't ready to name. He stood, gazing at the glowing city, knowing he'd been drawn into something riskier than any deal. Harper Lane. The next day, Julian assigned Harper a critical project segment, requiring her to report directly to him. They met more often, brushing shoulders in hallways, exchanging glances in meetings. Harper tried to stay cold, but whenever Julian stood close, a current ran down her spine. One afternoon, he called her to his office, presenting a new contract with a figure that stunned her. "You're worth more than you think," he said, his voice low, eyes locked on hers. Harper swallowed, heart pounding. "This is business, not a personal game, Thorne," she replied, her voice wavering. She left, closing the door, hearing his soft laugh, a sound that made her angry and curious. She told herself to stay sharp, but deep down, she knew she was losing the battle with her own heart. Harper stood by her studio window, watching light rain drizzle over New York streets. Her laptop screen glowed with an email from Julian Thorne, announcing she'd been chosen to lead a new international project for Thorne Global, an advertising campaign for a global luxury brand. "You'll report directly to me," he wrote, his tone concise but commanding. Harper frowned, her fingers tapping the desk sharply. What was he doing? After 2 weeks of working together, she'd tried to keep her distance, responding to emails professionally, avoiding his gaze in meetings. But Julian seemed determined to pull her into his orbit, as if that mistaken night at the Grand Meridian had started a game she didn't want to play. She couldn't refuse the project. The contract was bigger than anything she'd ever taken on, enough to cover her mother's hospital bills and save her studio from collapse. Harper sighed, thinking of the bills stacked in her drawer, each one a reminder that pride didn't pay debts. She typed an acceptance email, adding a line, "I expect this to be strictly professional, Mr. Thorne." As she hit send, she vowed not to let him control her, though her heart raced at the thought of his smirking smile. The next week, Harper received a plane ticket to Paris, a business trip to meet European partners. She froze when she saw Julian's name on the travel roster. Just work, she told herself. But at the Paris hotel, she discovered an error by his assistant. She and Julian were booked on the same floor, their rooms side by side. Harper confronted him in the lobby, her navy work dress hugging her frame, hair tied high, eyes blazing. "Are you toying with me?" she snapped, arms crossed. Julian, in a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, tilted his head, eyes glinting. "You got the wrong room last time," he said casually, "but I didn't pick the wrong person." The words silenced her, her heart pounding. She wanted to retort, but his voice, low, certain, left her rattled. They stepped into the elevator to their rooms, the confined space making Harper tense. Julian stood close, so near she felt his breath brush her hair. She stepped back, her back hitting the glass wall, but there was no escape. "Careful, Miss Lane," he whispered, his voice a soft warning. "I won't be patient forever." Harper turned away, cheeks burning, telling herself he was just teasing. But when the doors opened, she hurried out first, hiding her trembling hands. That night in her hotel room, she stood by the window overlooking the twinkling Seine, wondering why she couldn't stop thinking about him. Julian Thorne wasn't just a threat to her pride, he was a danger to her heart. In Paris, Julian kept pulling Harper into coincidental moments. He sought her input on everything, from the backdrop colors for a meeting to the restaurant for a client dinner. "What do you like, Harper?" he asked during one meeting, his gaze locking onto her in front of the team. She replied curtly, "I'd like you to let me work." Colleagues chuckled, but Julian only smiled, as if her defiance was a prize. Harper hated how he made her lose control, but she couldn't deny it. Every argument made her feel more alive than ever. They returned to New York, but Julian didn't relent. He inserted himself into every project detail, asking Harper to refine designs with him late into the night. One evening when the office had emptied, he called her to his private office to review final sketches. "You did well," he said, standing beside her, close enough that she caught the woody scent of his cologne. Harper stepped back, her voice firm. "If you're done, I'm leaving." He caught her wrist, his grip light but enough to stop her. "Why do you always run from me?" he asked, his eyes deep and searching. Harper yanked her hand free, heart racing. "Because I'm not your entertainment," she shot back, then walked out, leaving him standing there, his gaze darkening. That weekend, Thorne Global hosted a company party at a chic Manhattan rooftop. Harper attended reluctantly, knowing Julian would be there. She wore a simple black dress, hair loose, trying to blend into the crowd to avoid him. But while chatting with a colleague, she spotted Julian across the room, laughing easily with a female partner, a blonde in a silk green dress, her eyes sparkling at him. Harper gripped her wine glass, wondering why it bothered her. He was just her boss, nothing more. But as the band played a slow jazz tune, Julian approached, extending his hand. "Dance with me, Harper," he said, his voice low, his eyes commanding. She shook her head, her voice sharp in front of everyone. "I'm not your toy." The room hushed, colleagues' eyes fixed on them. Julian said nothing, only took her hand and led her to the balcony, the night breeze tossing her hair as he closed the glass door. His eyes stormed. "You think I'm playing?" he growled, stepping closer, making her back against the railing. "Then why are you in my head, Harper? Every day, every night." Harper froze, her heart pounding. She wanted to be angry, but his voice, furious, sincere, made her tremble. "You don't get to say that," she replied, her voice shaking. "You don't get to make me this confused." She pushed past him, running through the crowd to the elevator. In its enclosed space, she leaned against the wall, tears welling. She wasn't just angry at Julian. She was angry at herself for losing control of her heart. The next day, Harper avoided him, communicating only through project emails. She focused on her studio, her safe haven. One rainy afternoon, she was painting, abstract strokes brimming with emotion, as if venting her frustration onto the canvas. A knock startled her. Julian stood there, his shirt damp from the rain, holding documents as an excuse. "I need you to review these," he said, but his eyes lingered on her painting, then shifted to her. Harper wiped her hands on her apron, her voice stiff. "Couldn't you email them?" He stepped inside, the small space suddenly feeling crowded. He looked at her, his gaze softening unexpectedly. "Are you always this strong?" he asked, his voice gentle but piercing. Harper turned to her painting, her voice faltering. "No one gave me another choice." She didn't want him to see her reddened eyes or know she'd cried over him last night. Julian stood silently, as if seeing her unguarded for the first time. He said nothing more, just placed the documents on the table and left. As the door closed, a note slipped out. "You don't have to be alone." Harper picked it up, her heart warming, as if he'd touched a hidden part of her. She sat, clutching the note, telling herself to keep her distance. But looking at her unfinished painting, she realized its strokes resembled his eyes, deep, elusive. Harper returned to the office the next week, but limited contact with Julian to emails, declining in-person meetings. She worked remotely, sending designs online, trying to rebuild the wall between them. But one night she got a text from him. "I don't know what you're hiding from, but I'll wait." Harper stared at the screen, her fingers brushing the words. She deleted the message but couldn't erase him from her mind. Julian wasn't as simple as she'd thought. Not just a cold CEO, but someone who scared and intrigued her. Standing by her window, rain still falling, she wondered if she could keep running from her own heart. Harper sat in her small apartment, the dim desk lamp casting light on an unfinished painting on the easel. Its abstract lines were chaotic, like her mind right now. She had just deleted another email from Julian Thorne, an invitation to meet in person to discuss the international project. After that night on the rooftop, when he pulled her onto the balcony and said words that made her heart race, Harper knew she had to stop. She couldn't let him slip into her life, couldn't let his deep eyes or warm, low voice shake her. She'd fled the company party, but she couldn't escape the feeling that she was losing the battle with her own heart. She stood opening a drawer to pull out a stack of hospital bills. The debt for her mother's chronic hepatitis treatment kept growing, despite every contract she signed. Freelancing meant no company insurance, no steady savings, just sleepless nights finishing designs and hoping clients paid on time. Harper rubbed her temples, trying to push Julian's image from her mind. Was he the reason she was here? No, not entirely. She glanced at the painting, but her eyes drifted to the past, where everything began to crumble. 5 years ago, Harper was 22, fresh from college with dreams of studying art in Paris. Her family had been stable, not wealthy, but enough for her to dream. Her father invested heavily in a tech company, believing it would change their future. But then Thorne Global, led by Julian Thorne, acquired it. The deal was ruthless, non-negotiable, and her father lost everything. He left, abandoning Harper and her mother in a mortgaged house drowning in debt. Harper remembered the night her mother cried in the kitchen, voice trembling. "What do we do now, Harper?" At 18, Harper held her, vowing never to let anyone control her again. But fate didn't stop. Her mother broke down, then was diagnosed with chronic hepatitis. Harper sold the house, her paintings, her Paris dream to pay hospital bills. She taught herself design, worked day and night, and built her reputation from nothing. 6 months ago, when Thorn Global offered a contract, she refused instantly. Not for the deal, but because of Julian Thorn's name. To her, he was the symbol of all her pain, a heartless profiteer. Now Harper stared at the bills, wondering if she'd been wrong to let the past dictate her present. Julian wasn't what she'd assumed. He was sharp but cared for his staff, valued her ideas. She recalled the note he left at her studio. "You don't have to be alone." Her heart warmed, but she quickly pushed it aside. No, she couldn't soften. She shut her laptop, resolved to keep her distance. From now on, she'd communicate only by email, send designs online, and refuse in-person meetings. Her phone buzzed. A call from Julian. She stared at his name on the screen, fingers hesitating, then let it ring out. When the screen went dark, she exhaled, but her heart felt heavy. Miles away, Julian stood in Thorn Global's darkened office, gazing at the glittering city through the glass. He just returned from a meeting, but his mind wasn't there. Harper had avoided him all week, replying to emails with a cold tone, never meeting his eyes. He thought of the rooftop night when she pushed him away, her eyes angry and hurt. He'd gone too far, he knew, but the thought of her, her defiant smile, her stubborn gaze, kept him from stopping. He wanted to understand her, not just to win her over, but for something deeper. One afternoon, Julian drove aimlessly through Brooklyn until he saw a small sign, Hope Orphanage. He stopped, unsure why. Through the fence, he saw Harper in the yard, wearing a simple t-shirt, hair loosely tied, teaching kids to paint. She knelt, guiding a girl's brush, her smile radiant like sunlight. Julian stood still, his heart pounding, not for work, not for victory, but for her. Harper wasn't the haughty woman of rumors, not the one who rejected him out of arrogance. She was someone carrying the world on her shoulders, yet still giving time to these children. Julian didn't approach, afraid to break the moment, but he couldn't stop his curiosity. Through a mutual friend, he contacted Harper's mother, now living in the suburbs with her daughter's support. Over the phone, her frail but warm voice said, "Harper sold everything, our house, her paintings, her dreams to pay for my treatment. She works herself to exhaustion, but never complains." Julian was stunned, as if Harper's portrait had been redrawn. She wasn't a rival to conquer or a woman to tease. She was someone he wanted to protect, though he didn't yet know how. He began seeing Harper differently. In the office, he opened her emails, reading each curt line, picturing her at her laptop, hair messy, eyes strained from late work. He wanted to call, to say something, but he knew she was building walls. One night after a glass of whiskey, he texted, "I don't know what you're hiding from, but I'll wait." He sent it, wondering if she'd read it. In her apartment, Harper held her phone, the message glowing in the dark. She clutched it, torn. She wanted to reply, to say she wasn't hiding. She was scared, scared of him, of herself, of her heart leaning toward him. Harper stood, opening her window to let the night breeze in. She thought of her mother, of days in the hospital holding her hand, promising to be strong. She thought of the orphanage, where kids called her Miss Harper with innocent smiles. And she thought of Julian, not the powerful CEO, but the man who left a note at her studio, who stood close in the Paris elevator, his breath making her tremble. She shook her head, telling herself to focus on her mother, her work, herself. But as she turned to her easel, she saw her painting was no longer angry strokes. It was softer, like Julian's gaze when he looked at her. She sat, painting again, but her hand shook. She knew she couldn't erase him from her mind, no matter how hard she tried. At Thorne Global's office, Julian opened his computer, looking at a photo of Harper online, accepting an award, her smile proud but her eyes heavy with worry. He muttered, "You're driving me crazy, Harper." He closed the laptop, resolved to reach her, not with power, but with sincerity. He didn't know that, in her small apartment, Harper was staring at her painting, wondering if she had the courage to face him and her own heart. Harper stood before the mirror in her small apartment, adjusting the pearl-colored silk dress for tonight's Thorne Global event. She didn't want to go. Crowded parties exhausted her, especially knowing Julian Thorne would be there. After a week of avoiding him, communicating only through curt emails, his haunting gaze still lingered, deep, as if seeing through her. The note he left at her studio, "You don't have to be alone," remained in her purse, though she told herself she'd forgotten it. But her contract with Thorne Global demanded her presence, and she couldn't let anyone think she was hiding. She took a deep breath, applied red lipstick, and vowed to keep her distance, to not let him unsettle her again. The ballroom at the Four Seasons glowed with chandeliers, champagne flutes sparkling on silver trays. Harper entered, her silk dress hugging her slender frame, hair cascading in soft waves. She mingled with colleagues, chatting lightly, trying not to scan the room for Julian, but she felt him, an invisible current. He stood across the room, his black suit tailored perfectly, talking with partners, his gray eyes coolly sweeping the space. When their gazes met, Harper turned away, her heart racing. She told herself to stay calm, but a familiar voice sounded behind her. "Harper Lane, it's been too long." She turned, stunned to see Grant Mitchell, her ex-boyfriend, now a successful entrepreneur with a confident smile and sharp eyes. He wore a navy suit, hair neatly combed, exuding the charm that once captivated her 3 years ago. "Grant," she said, her voice steady despite a flicker of unease. "I hear you're working with Thorne Global?" Grant nodded, stepping closer. "True, but I'm here for you." His gaze hinted at rekindling the past. Harper shook her head, forcing a smile. "We're done, Grant." He tilted his head, undeterred. "I know you're working with Julian Thorne. He's not worthy of you, Harper. You could run an empire, not be some CEO's plaything." His words cut sharply, but Harper gave a faint laugh. "I don't belong to anyone," she replied firmly. Grant placed a hand on her shoulder, pulling her into an unexpected, overly familiar hug in front of the crowd. Harper stiffened, trying to push him away, but then she felt a piercing stare, like it was burning her. She glanced back and saw Julian a few meters away, his hand gripping his wine glass tightly, his eyes dark as a storm. He stopped talking to his partner, his gaze locked on her and Grant. Harper swallowed hard, her heart pounding, inexplicably feeling guilty. She broke free from Grant's embrace, muttering an excuse and moving away, seeking a quiet corner. But before she could leave the ballroom, a hand grabbed her wrist, pulling her into a hallway toward Thorne Global's temporary office in the hotel. Julian slammed the door, his eyes blazing. "What are you doing, Harper?" he growled, standing so close she felt his breath. Harper yanked her hand free, furious. "I wasn't doing anything. You don't get to drag me like this." Julian stepped forward, forcing her back until her spine hit the wooden desk. He leaned in, his gaze almost consuming her. "Grant Mitchell," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Are you going back to him?" Harper laughed bitterly, hiding her racing heart. "Are you jealous, Thorne?" "I'm not yours to control." But before she could finish, Julian kissed her, fierce, possessive, yet restrained, as if battling himself. His lips were hot, his hand holding the back of her neck, not letting her pull away. Harper froze, then shoved him back, gasping. "You think I'm your property?" she shouted, tears welling. Julian stared at her, his eyes still burning. "I let you walk away once," he said, his voice hoarse. "This time, if you choose Grant, I'll tear apart every deal he has." Harper shook her head, her heart aching. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of herself, because that kiss didn't just anger her. It made her crave him. She turned, storming out of the office, rushing through the ballroom, ignoring colleagues' as curious stares. In the elevator, she leaned against the wall, touching her lips, still feeling his. She was furious at Julian, but also at herself, for wanting to kiss him back, even for a moment. The next day, Harper tried to focus on work, but Grant wouldn't leave her alone. A bouquet of white roses arrived at her studio with a card. "Work with me, Harper. I can give you everything." She tossed the card in the trash, but her phone buzzed. A message from Grant, inviting her to join an independent project outside Thorn Global. She declined, polite but firm. But Grant called, and this time, his words stunned her. "Do you know what Julian Thorn did?" he asked, his voice cold. "5 years ago, your father's company begged Thorn Global for help. Julian refused, choosing his own Lee. He's the reason your family fell apart." Harper felt the blood drain from her face. She remembered her mother crying in the hospital, the house seized by the bank, her Paris dream vanishing. Did Julian know? Did he know and still let her suffer? She hung up, hands trembling. She drove to Thorn Global unannounced, storming into Julian's office like a hurricane. He was at his desk, surprise flashing in his eyes. "Is it true?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Did you know about my father's company and refuse to help us?" Julian stood, his gaze darkening. He was silent for a moment, then said, "It was business, Harper. I didn't know your family was involved." She shook her head, tears spilling. "That's you, isn't it? Always putting your interests first." She wanted him to deny it, to say something to soothe her old wounds, but he just watched her, his expression complex. "Believe who you want," he said finally, his voice low. Harper turned, tears falling silently. She left his office feeling like she'd lost something, not just trust, but the flicker of hope she'd begun to feel for him. Back home, Harper sat in the dark, hugging a pillow, trying to piece together her shattered emotions. She'd been wrong to let Julian get close, wrong to think he was different from what she feared. His kiss, angry, passionate, still haunted her. But now it felt like a reminder she couldn't trust him. She opened her laptop, drafting a resignation email from the Thorn Global project, but her finger hovered over the send button. She thought of her mother, the hospital bills, the studio she'd sweated to build. She closed the laptop, tears falling again. She resolved to cut Julian off completely. No meetings, no emails, nothing. But as she lay in bed, his eyes lingered in her mind, and she wondered if she could truly forget him. Harper sat in her studio, the dim light illuminating an unfinished painting on the easel. Its abstract lines were chaotic, mirroring her mind. She had just sent an email to Thorn Global, announcing her withdrawal from the international project, a decision that left her trembling as she hit send. That contract was her lifeline, enough to cover her mother's hospital bills and keep her studio afloat. But after the night at the Four Seasons, after Julian Thorn's furious kiss and Grant's revelation about the past, she couldn't go on. Every thought of Julian, his blazing eyes, his hand gripping her neck, brought both anger and pain. She had let him get close, had opened her heart, only to learn he was tied to her family's old wounds. She closed her laptop, vowing to return to freelancing, find new clients, and live without him. She stepped out of the studio and drove to the hospital to visit her mother. In the room, her mother lay frail, but smiled when she saw her. "Are you okay, Harper?" she asked, her voice gentle. Harper nodded, holding her mother's hand, but her gaze drifted. She didn't mention Julian or the pain of learning he'd refused to save her father's company. Instead, she talked about small projects she planned to take, about the orphanage where she taught art. But as she left, she sat in her car, clutching the steering wheel, tears falling silently. She wanted to forget Julian, but memories of him flooded back. His smirking smile at the Grand Meridian, his low voice saying her name, the kiss that made her tremble. She cursed her weakness, slamming the wheel, but couldn't deny her heart had stirred. The next day, Harper went to the Hope Orphanage in Brooklyn, finding peace among the children's smiles. She taught them to paint, helping them color dream houses on paper. "Miss Harper, is this pretty?" a girl asked, holding up her drawing, eyes sparkling. Harper smiled, ruffling her hair, but her heart felt heavy. She tried to focus on the kids, her mother, her upcoming freelance work. But back at the studio, she couldn't hold back. She grabbed a brush and painted, strokes pouring out fiercely, as if unloading her anger and pain. When she stepped back, she froze. The painting depicted a man in shadows, his eyes deep and unmistakable. It was Julian. She trembled, setting the brush down, wondering why he haunted her despite her efforts to sever all ties. In Manhattan, Julian stood in Thorn Global's darkened office, staring at Harper's email. "I'm withdrawing from the project. Thank you for the opportunity." The words were brief, cold, but he sensed the storm behind them. He tapped his fist lightly on the desk, regretting the kiss that night, letting jealousy drive him. He recalled her eyes when she confronted him about her father's company, angry, hurt, but defiant. He wanted to explain that he didn't know her family was involved, that the decision years ago was just business. But her words, "You only care about your interests," cut like a knife. For the first time, Julian felt defeated, not in a deal, but in the heart of the woman he couldn't stop thinking about. He sat down, writing a letter by hand, something he'd never done for anyone. "Harper," he began, "I was wrong. I let my emotions take over, and I hurt you. I don't expect forgiveness now, but I want you to know I'm not who you think." He paused, pen hesitating. He continued, admitting he didn't know about her father, promising to make amends. He sent the letter through his assistant, including another envelope, a logo design, H&J, Harper and Julian, with a handwritten note. "If you want, this is a new start." He didn't know if she'd read it, but he hoped. Julian didn't stop there. He remembered seeing Harper at the orphanage, her radiant smile as she taught the kids to paint. He contacted the director, offering to fund supplies, anonymously, so Harper wouldn't know. He also quietly sent money to the hospital, covering her mother's bills, asking to keep his name hidden. He wasn't trying to buy her. He just wanted to ease her burden, even slightly. For the first time, Julian learned to care without controlling, without forcing. He looked at a photo of Harper on his computer, accepting an award, her eyes proud, and muttered, "I'll wait, Harper." Harper received Julian's letter on a rainy afternoon. She sat in her studio, opening the envelope, her heart racing at his bold handwriting. She read, each line touching her wounds. "I'm not who you think." She wanted to tear it up, call him a liar, but tears streamed down. She opened the second envelope, seeing the H&J logo. Simple, elegant, their initials intertwined like a promise. She clutched the letter, sinking to the floor, crying as she hadn't in years. She wanted to forgive, to believe him, but fear of being hurt again held her back. She tucked the letter in a drawer, vowing not to respond, not to let him back in. She kept avoiding him, taking freelance jobs, accepting small projects to survive. She visited the hospital, stunned when the doctor said this month's bills were paid by an anonymous donor. She suspected but didn't dare ask. She focused on the orphanage, where the kids were her light. One day she arrived with new paints. In the yard she froze. Julian was there, sleeves rolled up, playing basketball with the kids, laughing freely, not the powerful CEO she knew. A boy shouted, "Uncle Julian, pass the ball." Harper stood still, her heart pounding. He was different. No possessive gaze from the Four Seasons, no teasing smirk. Just a man, shirt damp with sweat, eyes bright as a boy scored. Julian looked up, seeing her. He didn't approach, only gave a small smile. The kids pulled Harper to play, and she joined reluctantly, avoiding his gaze. When the game ended, the children ran for water, leaving them alone in the yard. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. Harper nodded, looking away. "Thanks for coming here," she said softly. Julian watched her, his eyes gentle. "I'll wait, Harper, however long it takes." He walked away, leaving her standing there, her heart in turmoil. At home, she opened the drawer, pulling out the H&J logo. She held the painting of the man in shadows and wondered if she dared give him a chance. She sat at her easel, painting again, but this time the canvas grew brighter, as if light were creeping into the dark. She knew she was wavering, that Julian wasn't the enemy she'd thought, but fear clung to her. Fear he'd hurt her again, fear her heart wasn't strong enough to love. She set the brush down, watching the rain outside, telling herself to be strong. But as she slept, her dreams weren't of hospitals or bills. They were of Julian, standing in the orphanage yard, smiling at her. Harper stood in the small exhibition hall of the Brooklyn Museum of Art, soft lights illuminating the paintings on the walls. She wore an elegant black silk dress, her hair tied low, her green eyes shimmering with anxiety. Tonight was the art auction she organized to raise funds for her mother's treatment. a final effort to cover hospital bills her freelance contracts couldn't manage. She had painted 3 pieces for the event, her first public display of personal work after years of commercial design. She didn't expect them to draw attention, only hoped they'd raise enough for a few more months of her mother's care. But standing amid the crowd, she felt hollow. Julian Thorne lingered in her mind, his gentle eyes at the orphanage, his apology letter, the H&J logo he sent. She hadn't responded, hadn't seen him since that day, but every night she clutched the painting she'd made, the man in shadows, and wondered if she was missing something. The crowd grew denser, art collectors and donors chatting lively. Harper stood by the coordinator, forcing a smile as they introduced her as the artist behind the auction. She didn't know Thorne Global was the main sponsor, or that Julian had quietly ensured the event's success. As the auction began, Harper lingered in a corner, gripping a glass of water, her heart pounding. Artworks went up, bids climbing, but she wanted to flee. Exposing her paintings to the world made her tremble. Then her first painting appeared, an abstract piece with swirls of blue and gold, like light piercing a storm. The coordinator announced, "Harper Lane, a hidden talent." She bowed her head, cheeks burning, avoiding eyes. The starting bid was $5,000, but a voice cut through from the back. $50,000. The crowd murmured, and Harper looked up, stunned. She couldn't see the bidder, but that voice, low, certain, made her heart race. The price soared, unchallenged, and the painting sold for $100,000. Her other 2 pieces followed, totaling $300,000, all to the same anonymous buyer. The coordinator declared, "We thank our sponsor who requested Harper Lane be named the auction's lead artist." Harper trembled, disbelieving. That sum could clear her mother's bills, giving her peace. But who? She hurried to the hallway, trying to breathe, then heard footsteps behind her. She turned, and Julian stood there, his black suit fitted perfectly, his eyes gentle yet intense. "It was you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Julian stepped forward, taking her hand, stopping her from retreating. "I didn't buy the paintings, Harper," he said, his voice deep. "I bought your dreams." Harper's tears spilled over. She wanted to be angry, to say he had no right, but his eyes, full of love, not control, melted her. She shook, gripping his hand. "Why, Julian?" she asked. "Why do this?" He smiled softly, brushing her hair. "Because I can't let you be alone anymore." They stepped into the museum's rose garden, moonlight glowing on white blossoms. Harper took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, knowing it was time to face everything. "I need to tell you," she began, her voice trembling. She spoke of her past, her father, his company's collapse, her mother's illness, her Paris dream dissolving. She told him of the pain when she learned Thorne Global refused to help, how she blamed him. "I thought you were heartless," she said, tears falling again. "I thought you'd hurt me like before." Julian stood silent, his eyes pained. He knelt, holding her hand, his voice hoarse. "I thought I could control everything, until you stumbled into my life. Turns out you're what I needed most." He explained. He didn't know her family was tied to that company, had acted on business logic then. "I was wrong not to look deeper," he said, his eyes sincere. "I'm sorry, Harper. I promise to make it right, not just for you, but for everything you cherish." Harper looked at him, her heart aching yet lighter. She saw him, not the powerful CEO, but a man willing to kneel, admitting his mistakes. She pulled him up, hugging him tightly, tears soaking his shirt. "I was wrong too, Julian," she whispered, "but stumbling into you was the rightest thing." He held her, kissing her hair, as if afraid she'd vanish. Under the moonlight they stood, unraveling misunderstandings, letting love blaze like an unstoppable fire. The next day, Harper returned to Thorne Global, but not for a contract. She met Julian in his office, morning light streaming through the glass. "I want to work with you," she said firmly, "but as a partner, not an employee." Julian smiled, his eyes bright. "I wouldn't have it any other way," he replied. They started anew, not just as lovers, but as equals. Harper took on the role of creative director for Thorne Global, but with a condition: equal say in decisions. Julian agreed instantly, as if it were obvious. They brought the H&J logo to life, a simple, powerful design, their initials entwined, symbolizing their bond. It launched at a grand event at the Grand Meridian, where it all began. Harper stood on the stage, her red dress vibrant as that gala night, her eyes confident as she unveiled the logo. Julian stood beside her, silent, but his gaze brimmed with pride. When she finished her speech, the crowd applauded, and he took her hand, whispering, "You did amazing." Harper smiled, feeling safe for the first time in years. In the crowd, Grant Mitchell appeared, polished in a gray suit. He approached, congratulating Harper with a faint smile. "You deserve it," he said, but his eyes flicked to Julian, challenging. Julian squeezed Harper's hand lightly, his gaze cold on Grant. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice low with warning. Grant nodded, stepping back. Harper glanced at Julian, teasing. "Still jealous?" He pulled her close, kissing her forehead in front of everyone. "Not jealous," he whispered. "I just want the world to know you're mine." Harper blushed but smiled, holding his hand tightly, knowing she'd found her place. They left the event, strolling through a park near the hotel. Under streetlights, they talked of the future. Not just work, but shared dreams. Julian admitted he once wanted to be a painter, his eyes distant. Harper teased, "And you became a CEO instead?" "Lame." He laughed, pulling her into his arms. "But it led me to you," he said warmly. Harper leaned into him, recalling the wrong room night, the mistaken door that opened a world of right. She thought of her mother, healthier now thanks to the auction funds. She thought of the orphanage, where she and Julian planned an art classroom. And she thought of him, once her enemy, now her everything. They stood under a large oak, moonlight filtering through leaves. "Project management." Julian looked at her, his eyes shining. "Thank you, Harper," he said, voice rough, "for not giving up on me." She smiled, kissing his lips softly. "Thank you for waiting for me." They held each other, the city quiet around them, a witness to a fated love born from a mistake. A year had passed since the art auction, and Harper Lane stood in the corner office on the 45th floor of Thorne Global, gazing at New York's skyline bathed in sunlight. At 28, she was now the global creative director of the conglomerate, not just an employee but a respected partner. Her designs graced international campaigns, from Times Square billboards to Paris fashion magazines. Yet her greatest pride wasn't fame. It was how people saw her, not as Julian Thorne's woman, but as Harper Lane, the woman who wrote her own story. She wore a navy blazer, hair tied high, a confident smile as she reviewed the final fall campaign designs. But in her pocket was an old piece of paper, the H&J logo Julian once sent, a reminder of their journey together. She left the office, driving to Brooklyn's suburbs, where her mother now lived in a cozy house near the Hope Orphanage. After the auction, Harper's paintings had cleared the hospital bills, and her mother's recovery was remarkable. She'd started teaching art to the orphanage kids for free, painting with them, her eyes sparkling like years ago. Harper parked, stepping into the yard, where her mother guided a girl sketching the Brooklyn Bridge. "You're here," her mother called, hugging her tightly. Harper smiled, warmth spreading through her. She thought of days when her mother lay in the hospital, nights she cried over bills. Now it felt like a dream. Not just because of money, but because she was no longer alone. That afternoon, Harper got a text from Julian. "Meet me at the Grand Meridian, 7 p.m. I have a surprise." She frowned, smiling suspiciously. Julian always surprised her, from random bouquets at her studio to quietly listening to her pitch ideas in meetings. She drove to the hotel where it all began, wearing a red silk dress reminiscent of last year's gala night. When the elevator opened on the 50th floor, she froze. The top floor was renamed Harper Suite, a gold plaque reading, "Where Fate Began." Julian stood there, his black suit fitted perfectly, eyes lighting up as he saw her. "What are you doing?" Harper asked, half laughing, half scolding. She stepped inside, seeing the room transformed. Not the unfamiliar suite of before, but a warm space with framed photos on the walls, her accepting an award, teaching kids at the orphanage in a blurry shot, her asleep on his bed that mistaken night, hair messy, red dress slipped off her shoulder. "Julian," she yelped, blushing, rushing to playfully hit his chest. He laughed, wrapping her in a hug from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Next time you name something, ask me first," she teased, but her eyes sparkled. Standing in the Harper suite, she recalled that fated night, the drunken haze, panic seeing him, the defiance she threw at him. Now she smiled, because everything was perfect. They stepped onto the balcony, overlooking the city's twinkling lights. The night breeze lifted Harper's hair. Julian stood behind her, arms around her waist, his voice warm. "Thank you for picking the wrong room, Harper," he whispered, "and leaving your heart behind." Harper turned, meeting his eyes, no longer the possessive gaze from the Four Seasons, but those of a man who loved her unconditionally. "Thank you for not letting me go," she replied, her voice soft but firm. They kissed under the lights, slowly, like a vow to stay together forever. The city watched silently, and as they left the balcony, the H&J logo glowed on the distant Thorn Global building, a symbol of their love and partnership. Harper held Julian's hand, a sense of safety washing over her. She thought of their journey, from adversaries to lovers, from misunderstandings to forgiveness. He wasn't just her partner, but the man who saw her at her weakest and stayed. She recalled Grant, who once tried to pull her back, now a faint shadow. She thought of her mother, the kids and herself, the girl who feared love, now learning to embrace it. Julian looked at her, as if reading her mind. "You okay?" he asked. Harper smiled, leaning into his shoulder. "More than okay," she said. Weeks later, Harper and Julian hosted an art exhibition at the Hope Orphanage. The yard was adorned with string lights and paint palettes, displaying her work and the children's. Harper stood amid the crowd, in a simple white dress, her eyes bright as kids ran around, showing off their art. A girl tugged her hand, presenting a drawing of them. "Miss Harper and Uncle Julian." Harper laughed, hugging her. Julian stood beside, sleeves rolled up, his gaze soft on her. He said nothing, just held her hand, fingers intertwined. Harper's mother was there too, healthier than ever, chatting with parents. She looked at Harper and Julian, smiling as if knowing they'd found each other. When the exhibition ended, the kids gathered around, begging for stories. Harper sat on the grass, telling of a girl who entered the wrong room and found love. The children giggled, asking, "That's you, right?" Harper blushed, glancing at Julian. He winked, pulling her into his arms in front of the kids, sparking their cheers. That night, they returned to the Harper suite, standing by the window overlooking the city. Harper leaned against Julian's chest, feeling his heartbeat. "I used to think I didn't need anyone," she said softly. "Then you came, and everything changed." Julian kissed her forehead, his voice rough. "I thought I had everything," he replied, "until I met you and realized I was missing the most important thing." They stood holding each other, knowing they'd found their true family. Not just together, but with her mother, the kids, and the world they were building. Under the city lights, Harper smiled, thinking of the wrong door to room 1903. She'd once fled it, feared it would destroy her. Now she knew it was the start of everything. From one mistaken door, they'd opened a world of right, a world of love, forgiveness, and dreams no longer unfinished. She held Julian's hand, gazing at the glowing H&J logo on the horizon, and whispered, "We did it, didn't we?" He smiled, kissing her again. "More than that, Harper. More than that." Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.